The diner was dead. Not literally, of course. Lisa was pretty sure the old place would outlive everyone in it, but business was slow. A few regulars sat hunched over their coffee cups, stirring sugar into the bitter sludge that Mr. Carter insisted was house blend. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing faintly overhead. Lisa adjusted her apron, her fingers numb from the cold draft sneaking through the front door. Winter was settling in fast, and the small-town diner barely had enough customers to keep the heat running. Then she saw him. Out by the curb, hunched over on a bench, sat an elderly homeless man. Lisa had seen him before, always hovering near the diner, but never stepping inside. Tonight, he looked worse than usual. His coat was frayed at the edges, his hands trembling as he rubbed them together for warmth. A dirty military patch was barely visible on his sleeve. A veteran. Lisa felt something twist inside her chest. She knew better than to offer him food. Mr. Carter had a strict policy: no handouts, no free meals. "We're a business, not a charity," he'd grumble whenever she asked. But tonight she didn't care. Lisa grabbed a hot plate from the kitchen, a steaming bowl of beef stew, some bread, and a cup of coffee. It was leftovers anyway. No one would miss it. She glanced toward the back office. Mr. Carter was busy doing inventory. Good. Slipping outside, she approached the man. "Hey," she said, offering a small, nervous smile. "Cold night, huh?" The man looked up slowly, his eyes wary. Lisa felt her stomach drop. He looked exhausted. "Yeah," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Lisa held out the plate. "Here. Figured you could use something warm." For a moment, he didn't move, just stared at the food like it was some kind of trick. Then, his lip trembled. "Ma'am," his voice cracked. "You don't have to do this." Lisa shrugged. "Yeah, I do." The man swallowed hard. Slowly, with shaking hands, he took the plate. And then, his eyes filled with tears. Lisa had to look away because it hurt to see. But just as she turned, the diner door slammed open. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lisa froze. Mr. Carter. His face was red with fury, his beady eyes locked onto the plate in the man's hands. Lisa felt her heart plummet. "Carter, it's just... I don't give a damn what it is," he snapped. "I told you, no free food. Are you stealing from me now?" Lisa opened her mouth, but she never got the chance to explain. "You're fired." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Fired? Over this? "But, Carter, come on. You want to feed bums?" He jabbed a finger at her chest. "Go do it somewhere else." Lisa stared at him. A part of her wanted to beg. She needed this job. She was already behind on rent. But another part of her? The part that still had dignity? That part refused to apologize for doing the right thing. Lisa pulled off her apron, her hands trembling, not from fear, but rage. She turned to the veteran, who was still frozen, still holding the food like he was afraid it would be ripped away from him. "You finish that," she told him softly. "Don't let anyone tell you you don't deserve it." Then, she shoved the apron into Carter's hands and walked away. Lisa didn't stop walking until she was halfway down the block. Her hands were clenched so tight her fingernails dug into her palms, but she barely felt it. Fired. Over a damn plate of food. The night air bit at her skin, the cold wrapping around her like an unwelcome embrace. The streets were mostly empty. This town shut down early, and the only people still out this late were either leaving bars or had nowhere to go at all. Like him. Lisa slowed her pace and glanced back. The veteran, James, as he had introduced himself just before Carter's outburst, was still sitting on the bench. The plate rested in his lap, untouched. His hands were trembling. Lisa sighed. He felt guilty. She turned around and walked back toward him. "You gonna eat that, or did I just lose my job for nothing?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. James blinked at her, his gaze full of sorrow. I didn't mean for that to happen," he rasped. Lisa sat down beside him, ignoring the cold metal seeping through her jeans. "It's not your fault," she said. "Carter's always been a hard ass. This was just an excuse." James finally picked up the spoon and took a small bite. Lisa watched the tension in his shoulders ease just a little. They sat in silence for a while. The streetlights cast long shadows, stretching across the pavement like ghosts. "You a soldier?" Lisa asked eventually, nodding toward the patches on his tattered coat. James chewed slowly before nodding. "Yeah," he murmured. "Used to be." Lisa waited. She knew that when people said things like that, there was more to it. James stared ahead, served 3 tours, came back, and, well, here I am. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Lisa didn't ask why. She didn't ask about the war, about what he had seen, about what he had done. She just nodded. Yeah, here you are. James gave her a small, grateful smile. But then, a black car rolled up. Lisa's stomach tightened. No one drove through this street at this hour. The diner was closed, and the only thing around was a laundromat and a boarded-up liquor store. The car was expensive, shiny, black, sleek. Not the kind you'd expect to see in a town like this. The driver's door swung open. Lisa tensed, ready to grab James and run if she had to. A man stepped out, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Lisa's entire rent. And the moment James saw him, his whole body went rigid. Lisa felt the air shift. "James?" she asked cautiously. But James didn't move. His eyes were locked on the man. The stranger took a slow step forward. "Sergeant James Carter?" Lisa felt James' breath hitch. The man exhaled sharply as if he had been holding something in for years. "I've been looking for you," he said. Lisa felt a chill race down her spine. Who the hell was this guy? And more importantly, what did he want with James? Ames didn't move. He barely breathed. Lisa felt it, the shift in the air, the weight pressing down on the space between them. The moment that name left the stranger's lips, something inside James fractured. Lisa wasn't sure if it was fear or something deeper. Slowly, the stranger stepped closer. "Sergeant Carter," he repeated, his voice low, steady, almost hesitant. James's hand tightened around the spoon, knuckles turning white. Lisa shot a look between them. What the hell was going on? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firm but laced with unease. The man paused. Then, with a slow exhale, he reached into his coat pocket. Lisa tensed, but he wasn't reaching for a gun. Instead, he pulled out a worn military ID. Lisa leaned in just enough to read it. General Robert Langley. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't exactly an expert on military ranks, but she knew enough to recognize that name. This man was high up. James had gone pale. "Langley!" The name came out in a whisper. Langley's jaw tightened. "You remember me?" James swallowed hard. He nodded. Barely. Lisa's heart pounded. She had spent the last few minutes worrying about how she was going to find another job, but now she was sitting next to a homeless veteran who was being sought out by a high-ranking military officer. "Someone want to explain what the hell is happening?" Lisa asked, feeling her patience wear thin. Langley's eyes flickered to her. "And you are?" "A waitress," she said. "A recently unemployed one, thanks to all this." Langley's lips pressed together. Then he turned his gaze back to James. "I've been looking for you," he said, "for a long time." James exhaled slowly. "I figured you might be," he muttered. Lisa felt another chill creep up her spine. She shifted uncomfortably, waiting for James to say more, but he didn't, so she turned to Langley instead. "Why? Who is he to you?" Langley hesitated. His gaze flickered, as if debating whether or not to answer. Then, finally, he said, "He saved my life." Lisa blinked. "What?" Langley nodded. "It was 6 years ago, middle of a hellstorm in Afghanistan. Our convoy was hit and we were outnumbered. Carter pulled me out of a burning vehicle when I was half dead. He held the line until reinforcements came. I walked out of there alive because of him." Lisa slowly turned to James, stunned. James just stared at the ground. "You never told me that," she murmured. James let out a dry chuckle. "It's not exactly a fun story." Langley's expression darkened. "No, it's not. Because after that, you vanished." James flinched. Langley stepped closer. "I tried to find you. After I recovered, I reached out. I put in requests, but you were gone. You disappeared without a trace." Lisa watched as James rubbed his hands together, nervous. Langley's voice softened. "Why, Carter?" he asked. "What happened to you?" James finally looked up, and what Lisa saw in his eyes made her stomach twist. Guilt. Pain. The kind of grief that never really leaves. And she knew, whatever had happened after that mission, it had broken him. Lisa had so many questions. But before she could ask, James took a deep breath, looked Langley in the eye, and said, "I didn't vanish. I was left behind." And the moment those words left his mouth, Langley stilled. His face paled, his hands curled into fists. And Lisa? She felt the night get a whole lot colder. Langley stood frozen, the weight of James' words sinking in like a lead weight pressing against his chest. "I didn't vanish. I was left behind." Lisa wasn't sure if she should breathe or if doing so might shatter the tense silence stretching between the two men. James's voice was steady, but there was something else beneath it. Resentment, exhaustion, the weight of years spent in the shadows, forgotten. Langley finally exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Jesus, Carter, what happened?" James let out a humorless chuckle. "What do you think happened?" He shook his head. "You got pulled out, sir. And the rest of us?" His eyes darkened. "We were marked as expendable." Langley stiffened. Lisa saw it, the way his face twisted like he was swallowing something sharp and bitter. "I didn't know," Langley said, his voice low, rough. "They told me..." He stopped himself, his hands curled into tight fists. "They said everyone was accounted for." James scoffed. "Yeah? And did you actually check?" Langley's silence was enough of an answer. Lisa swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She had no idea what exactly had happened out there, but one thing was clear. James was left behind while the rest of his team was written off, and no one had looked for him. Until now. James rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Doesn't matter now," he muttered. "It's done." Langley's jaw clenched. "It matters," he said. "It damn well matters, Carter." But James just shook his head. "Forget it." Lisa couldn't stay silent anymore. "Wait," she cut in. "You're telling me this whole time you thought he was dead?" Langley hesitated, then nodded. Lisa's stomach dropped. So James had been fighting to survive all these years, completely alone. He had saved Langley's life, and in return, no one came back for him. Lisa looked at James, seeing him in a different light now. How many nights had he spent alone on the streets, knowing that the people he had bled for hadn't even checked if he was still breathing? It made her sick. Langley exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "I should have done more," he admitted. "I should have..." James waved a hand. "It's over, sir. You can't change it." Langley looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could, a second car pulled up. Lisa turned toward the diner, her stomach tightening. It was Mr. Carter. He had stepped outside, probably to throw out trash, but now he was standing there, staring at them, specifically at Langley's expensive car. His beady eyes narrowed in suspicion. Lisa knew that look. He thought he had messed up, and now he was wondering just how badly. Langley noticed him too. He followed Lisa's gaze, then turned to James. "Is that the guy who fired her?" James nodded. Langley exhaled through his nose, his expression darkening. Lisa barely had time to react before Langley started walking toward Mr. Carter. James and Lisa exchanged quick looks before following behind him. Carter, sensing something was off, plastered on a fake smile. Evening," he said, trying to sound polite. "What can I do for you?" Langley stopped directly in front of him. "You fired this woman," Langley said, his voice calm but dangerous. Mr. Carter's smile faltered. "Well, now, that's not entirely accurate," Carter said quickly. She was breaking policy, see? Giving away food that we..." Langley's expression didn't change, but something about it made Mr. Carter visibly sweat. Langley's voice dropped. "That man sitting on the bench? He's a war hero," he said. "He saved my life. And this woman?" He gestured at Lisa. "She's the only person who treated him like a human being." Mr. Carter opened his mouth, but Langley kept going. "That food you were so worried about?" Langley leaned in, lowering his voice to something cold. "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing here right now. So tell me, Carter, what's it like knowing you threw away a good employee just because she had more compassion than you ever will?" Carter sputtered, looking anywhere but at Langley. Lisa had to fight a smirk. You have to understand," Carter stammered, his entire demeanor shifting. "I was just trying to run a business. It's not personal." Langley tilted his head. "Not personal, huh?" Carter nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Just Just business. Langley's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Good, he said. Then you won't take it personally when I buy this place and fire you. Carter's face went sheet white. Lisa almost laughed out loud. You're joking, right? Carter stammered, glancing between them. Langley didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to Lisa. You want your job back? He asked. Lisa looked at Carter, who was now sweating bullets. Then she turned back to Langley. She thought about it, and then she smiled. Nah, she said. I think I've got better options now. Langley grinned. Carter? He looked like he was about to pass out. Lisa didn't stay to see the fallout. She turned on her heel, walking back toward James, who was watching with an expression somewhere between stunned and amused. You just turned down a job from a guy who was about to fire his own boss for you, James muttered. Lisa shrugged. Yeah, she said. But I figured if I was going to work for someone, it'd be someone who actually gave a damn. James chuckled, shaking his head. Langley finally turned back toward them. I have a business proposition, he said. For both of you? Lisa raised a brow. Oh? Langley nodded. I run a small network of restaurants. We believe in hiring people who need a second chance, including veterans. Lisa's stomach flipped. James's eyes widened. Langley continued. I can offer you both something better. A fresh start. Lisa's throat tightened. James? He looked like he might actually cry. Lisa swallowed hard. She had just lost everything, and yet somehow, she had never felt more hopeful. Lisa had spent the last few hours thinking her life was falling apart. Now, she was staring at an opportunity she never saw coming. James, on the other hand, looked shell-shocked. His fingers twitched like he wasn't sure if he should accept what was being offered or run. Langley noticed. You don't have to say yes right now, he said. But I'll tell you this. You've been forgotten long enough, Carter. You deserve better. James swallowed hard. Lisa nudged him. Hey, she murmured. What have you got to lose? James let out a breath, a shaky, uncertain breath, and finally nodded. All right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Langley clapped him on the shoulder. Good. Then he turned to Lisa. And you? Lisa grinned. I'm in. Langley smiled. Good, get in the car. Lisa blinked. Wait, now? Langley chuckled. I don't waste time. And just like that, it was happening. Lisa barely had time to process it. She and James were being given a way out. As she slid into the back seat of Langley's car, James hesitated at the door. He turned back toward the bench, the spot where he had been sitting, forgotten and unseen, for who knew how long. He wasn't coming back to it. James exhaled. Then, slowly, he climbed in. The car pulled away from the diner, from Mr. Carter's stunned face, from the life they were both leaving behind. As the diner disappeared in the rearview mirror, Lisa couldn't help but laugh. James raised an eyebrow. What? Lisa shook her head. Nothing. I just didn't expect today to end like this. James huffed a small laugh. Yeah, tell me about it. Langley glanced at them through the mirror. Something tells me, he said, this is just the beginning. Lisa smirked. Yeah. For the first time in a long time, she believed it.